weekend, of course, we celebrate the outer freedom of India. And we're going to talk this morning, of course, about inner freedom, final liberation, moksha. Swami Triyananda tells a charming story in The New Path of a time when he was with his Guru Yogananda, and one day Swamiji's cousin Sue came to visit, came to the Sunday satsang, and came to lunch with Yoganandaji afterwards. And she said how Sue confessed how she had found Master charming. But Sue then challenged me, why do you have to call him Master? This is a free country. Americans aren't slaves. And anyway, no one has a right to be called the master of any other human being. Sue, I said, it isn't our freedom we've given him. It's our bondage. I've never known anyone so respectful of the freedoms of others as Yogananda is. We call him master in the sense of teacher. He is a true master of the practices in which we ourselves are struggling to excel. You might say he's our teacher. He's our teacher in the art of achieving true freedom. True freedom? How can you say that? You can vote, can't you? You can travel anywhere you want to, can't you? Isn't our American way of life proof enough that you're free already? Is it? I smiled. Think of how bound people are by their attachments and desires. They want 1,000 things, most of which they'll never get, in the belief that through them they'll find happiness. In conditioning their happiness by material objects, they enslave themselves. Happiness isn't things, Sue, it's a state of mind. Sue pondered my words a few moments. Well, she concluded, I still think that I'll be happier when we can afford a new sofa. Well, do you think Sue was happier when they got a new sofa? Not likely. Or maybe for a while. It's hard to get lasting happiness and final liberation from a new sofa. In fact, a study could be made of how long any new acquisition will give us happiness. You know, new car, maybe a few days or weeks we'll be happier. New house, well, maybe some months, or until the first electricity bill comes, or the first repairs have to be done. What can we buy that will make that good feeling last longer? Yoganandaji, in the essence of the Bhagavad Gita, tells us that final liberation hinges on 3 questions. 1, do you prefer happiness to suffering? Well, obviously, ultimately, we all do. But then there might be some little things, maybe there's some little pain that is useful to us. Maybe we get sympathy that we want through that suffering. Are we really ready to let go of it? And the second question, are you willing to renounce the ego? To renounce the ego attachment to those things that are not giving us complete happiness. And 3, are you willing to do the work to find lasting happiness? When we become aware of some mental or emotional habits, we need to use our willpower, we need to use our self-discipline to root out that habit, to change ourselves. We need to have that willingness. And we need to put out the energy to break the hold that that delusion has over us. Elsewhere in the Gita, Sri Krishna describes 2 ways to reach liberation. One is through divine perception in meditation, and one is through right action, through Dharma. And we can achieve that right action through Karma Yoga, through Seva. One of the disciples of Yogananda Ji, he spent the Second World War in a concentration camp. And he said that those were the best years of his life. Every outer satisfaction, pleasure, distraction had been taken away from him. He was left with himself. He had to introspect. And he was left with nothing else. He was treated cruelly. And he could easily be bitter. Or he could respond with love. He could respond with right action. And that was the path that he chose. And that he took that experience in a spirit of overcoming, of helping others, of serving. And he demonstrated that the prison could not imprison his spirit. And he grew tremendously through that experience. Well, it's not an experience that I would wish any of us to have. But it's a wonderful example of if only we could remove all of those temptations and all of those distractions that pull us outwards. But it's not always quite that easy. When we take a pilgrimage group to Calcutta, sometimes we visit the home of the levitating saint, who's described in Autobiography of a Yogi. And this saint gave up great family wealth. He renounced it in order to seek moksha. But he explains it differently. He says, no, you're reversing the case. I left a few paltry rupees, a few petty pleasures for a cosmic empire of endless bliss. The short-sighted worldly folk are the real renunciants. They relinquish an unparalleled divine possession for a poor handful of earthly toys. Beautiful how he expressed that. In the early days of Ananda Village in the 1970s, most of us were single in our 20s. We had not really started career or marriage or family. There was very little outward that we had to renounce. We would make the joke that we didn't renounce the world had renounced us. And usually, as is the case with us here today on the spiritual path, God doesn't ask us to renounce our family, our wealth, our job, our responsibilities. Rather, he asks us to renounce our attachment to all of those things. And that can be a little more difficult. To live in the world and not be materialistic, not be matter-oriented, and not be controlled by the senses. That is the challenge in front of us. And even those who renounce outwardly can hold on to attachments that keep them back, and they're harder to give up. There is the story of the 2 monks who were walking by the river, and they came across this beautiful maiden who was desperately trying to cross the river, but it was monsoon and the water was too deep. And so one of the monks took the lady in his arms and carried her across the river and put her down on the other side. And the monks kept walking. And after about an hour, the second monk said, "I am so ashamed of you. You did such a bad thing. You know that as monks we can't touch women, and yet you carried her over the river." And the first monk said, "Well, I did carry her over the river, and I put her down on the other side. That was an hour ago, but it seems that you are still carrying her with you." Still carrying the attachment. And so, for us to let go of attachments and desires, we need to learn to put them down, and then we can be free. In the email newsletter that we sent you this week, we included a song by Swamiji, and that song ends with these words: "If you're seeking freedom, cast away desires. Once your heart is free, you'll be king everywhere." Thank you.
Keshava and I never compare notes on what he's going to say and what I'm going to say, and suddenly I'm feeling that that was unfortunate. Because I was thinking, I think I was going to say that, I think I was going to say that. Well, I think we've established that freedom is not outside of ourselves, it is within. And I also was going to talk about a prisoner in a concentration camp, but this was Viktor Frankl, and he wrote this classic book, Man's Search for Meaning. Probably many of you have heard of it. If you haven't heard of it and haven't read it, it's a beautiful book, Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. And you know, the point is, of course, no matter what people do to us on the outside, you know, there is within us, if we are free inside, a place where nothing can touch us. And for war heroes, for people who are brave, for people who face so many adversities and yet can remain inwardly free, nothing can touch them. And that's what it means to be truly free. And how do we get to that place? Because even if we have moods, we're not free. If suddenly we're depressed, we're not free of a mood that can just come take over us. Or if our friends or someone that we know comes to us in anger and says difficult things to us, if we react in anger, if we react emotionally, if we let other people's moods or emotions affect ours, we're not free either. So how do we become free of all of these things? Of course, the answer is go inside. We can only become free, divinely free, from inside. And how does meditation help us to do that? It helps us to, first of all, get away from the outer things of the world for a while. You know, all these things outside that we find so important and distracting and bothersome, let's just get away from them for a while and go inside. And when we do go inside, we can expand our realities, make broader realities real for us. And that we can expand our consciousness, broaden our realities, and when that happens, the limitations, the little limitations of our ego that bother us day to day begin to disappear, and they don't have the same control over us. And another thing that Swami Kriyananda tells us to do to achieve freedom is look at life in a longer rhythm. You know, when we're little babies and a bottle is taken away from us, there's nothing else in front of us. All we can see is that bottle is gone, and we are desperately upset. But as we get older, we realize that's no big deal. And then we get to a certain age, and oh, my brand new wonderful dress, I have a stain. You know, and for a while, that's a big deal, and that can affect us. But then, longer rhythm, we start to realize there will always be more dresses. Then, as we get older, we start to see that very difficult things can happen to us. You know, maybe we lose close loved ones. Maybe tragedies happen in our lives. And we think, how can we get through it? And then somehow or another, the grace of God and Divine Mother are with us, and we get through these tragedies, and we realize that in the terms of the span of a long lifetime, many different things are going to happen to us. But it's not what happens to us, it's how we grow through what happens to us, who we become. And as we're slowly learning to know who it is we truly are, we realize that nothing in this life in the end is all that important, because it will end. At the end of this lifetime, it will end. So then we can start to say, you know, if we get this broader and broader and broader long-term perspective, we can say, even this one lifetime is not that important. When we come to the whole evolution of our soul in finding freedom, what's important is that I learn why I was born and grow through all of these things that happen to me. So when we can step back and take this more objective, long-term, eternal, infinite perspective, suddenly we don't sweat the small stuff. And you know, I was looking at this chant, I own nothing, I am free, I own no one, I need nothing, I need no one. It's a beautiful, beautiful chant. But then we ask ourselves, let's see, deep down, do I believe that? You know, do I really not need anybody? And we think of, you know, obviously our families are very, very important to us. And we think, no, I definitely need my family. You know, I definitely need my kids. And what if something happened to them? It's so much better to enjoy things outside of ourselves with God's joy. You know, nothing does belong to us. It all belongs to God. Our family belongs to God. And if we can remember that they don't belong to us, they belong to God, we can enjoy them so much more. And we can do everything we can to help them and set them on the right path and take care of them. But in the end, they're not ours. And so we have to also have the long-term perspective. I've done everything I can. I lay them at your feet. And I want to be free otherwise. I don't want to live in fear that something's going to happen to them. You know, rise, O my soul, in freedom. Nothing to fear anymore. Look at the long-term perspective. And you know, perhaps some of your friends, as you get onto the spiritual path or you start to meditate, people think, that sounds so boring. Or it sounds, you know, it sounds like you're certainly giving up a lot of freedoms, giving up your Sunday mornings. And perhaps, you know, you're going to bed early because you have to wake up in the morning and meditate. You know, that doesn't sound very independent to me. Are they brainwashing you over there? And, you know, you start to think that as we practice the yams and the niyams, and you say, no, I'm trying to be nonviolent. I'm trying to not tell a lie. I'm trying to have cleanliness. I'm trying to do austerities, have tapasya, so that in the long run, even though maybe at the beginning it seems like we're controlling ourselves, in the end, we will receive that freedom. We'll achieve that freedom that our hearts are longing for. And yet, if our friends want to go out and stay out all night and drink all night, that's fine for them, but how are they going to feel in the long run? They're going to be bound to that alcohol, perhaps. Or even, you know, greedy businessmen. You know, they're thinking of themselves. You know, if they're thinking only of themselves, what's going to happen to their consciousness? You know, they're going to think only of themselves, their consciousnesses will become smaller and smaller, and they're going to lose touch with the greater reality of the world around them. You know, when we poison the rivers, you know, the corporations that do that, when we put toxins, anything that we do, if we're not taking the planet, if we're not taking the bigger world around us into consideration, we shrink our consciousness. And so in meditation we expand our consciousness so our freedom becomes greater. God is on our side. He wants us to be free. If we ask to be free, if we ask Him to help us to be free, He will. And that may not look like we want it to look like. Keshava was talking about non-attachment. I mean, if God sees that what you fear most is what's holding you back for freedom, He may just give you exactly that. Because if you don't go through it and grow through it and realize in the end, it's okay. In the end, you're still going to feel God's presence and know that souls are eternal, and this is an infinite, eternal path that we're on. You know, God's going to help us find out what it is that we need to have taken from our lives in order to grow. So don't be attached, because if you're attached, you can almost be sure, and if you're a good devotee, you can almost be sure that something's going to come up to take it away. And so let's choose to be free in our hearts. You know, Swami Kriyananda was one of the most free human beings I have ever seen, ever met personally. And why is that? It's because his heart is completely fulfilled. His deepest heart's longing is completely fulfilled. And so let's look inside. What is our deepest heart's longing? If it's to be freed, we will become free.